Welcome and thanks for joining us. We are in the beautiful Peninsula Gallery in Sydney, BC, Canada, where I happily am represented along with many other wonderful Canadian artists. And I'm here with Mitchell Jones, who
Thank you.
takes care of all the framing for the gallery.
Yes.
And we are here to talk framing, and specifically about framing soft pastels.
Okay.
And before we get going, Mitchell, would you just tell us a little bit about yourself? And
Thank you, Gail. So I was lucky enough to partner up with this gallery a year ago. I take care of all the custom framing aspects for the art that comes into the gallery, and we also have a full custom framing operation offering full services to the general public as well. I've also been framing for about the past 30 years in a gallery that did everything from original art to children's art, posters, limited editions. And because of that, I have seen how a lot of formulas can cross over, and there is a lot of artists and the general public that sometimes feel that certain art has to be framed in only one format. But as long as protection has been addressed, there are some wonderful formats that can certainly be crossed over and allow us to think outside the box.
I like that. Thinking outside the box, and with pastels, of course, protection is paramount.
Yes.
So let's get into it.
Wonderful. We're going to be covering quite a bit, and we would be happy to do more in-depth videos of particular topics as well as we go along if there's feedback and you wish to know more. But
Please give us feedback.
Yeah. We want to. I want as much information and education out there as possible for all customers and artists. Picture framing does not have to be a mystery. And there are some wonderful things that can be done with picture framing, so never feel like there's a stupid question to be addressed. But packaging.
Before you get there,
Yes.
I'm just going to pick that up.
You bet.
Just what you said about there being no stupid questions.
Yeah.
I guess I'd like to just talk a little bit about the framer-client relationship.
Yes.
Because I have been to framers. I mean, I'm an artist, and people say, well, you should know about color, and you should know. And I go, I don't really know.
Right.
Because it's a completely different thing from painting.
Yes.
And I have been in situations where I've felt really kind of, I feel really stupid. And I want to say I've been made to feel stupid, but of course nobody makes you feel stupid. But I've been in situations where I feel really uncomfortable, and I'm just like, okay, well, obviously you know best, and that's not always the case.
Right.
So it's
And in our industry, unfortunately, that is something that has been specifically designed a little bit so that a picture framer comes across as the professional and knowledgeable person. So you walk in and you hand it to them and they take care of it. And that's not to say that you can't be happy with framers that approach it in that manner, but because how you design and how you incorporate work into your house and design, there, in my opinion, is something where there should be more conversation to know the setting, to know why the piece is important to the person. Not every single picture that goes into a house has to be framed up elaborately and be the major showpiece. There's a balance that should be talked about. So for me as a picture framer, I love to engage with a customer and find out why the piece is important to them. Is it literally going into the guest bedroom that's going to be hung there and looked at 4 times a year when they change the sheets? Or is it going over the mantle? It is something that is expensive. So certainly the customer's budget can be perhaps set aside for the piece that is a signature picture that they truly love and want to love even more because of how nicely it's framed. Or is it something that they literally are just covering a fuse box in the hallway and it just needs to be that size?
Yeah, and one of the things that, for me, why we started these videos is because I felt with Mitchell, I could ask those stupid questions, and with such patience, you answer and go through things, and I never feel rushed. So that made me, and your focus on education. So that was another reason, like, let's make these videos, so that's why we're.
Yeah, I always hope that with these conversations, with any consultation, that a customer will walk away more educated. So even if they move out of the city or they go to another framer, they're better armed and they're going to have more knowledge. And it will mean that the consultation will get smoother and shorter and faster because they come back with the knowledge. Well, not always, but
there's more anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get going on
Wonderful.
the framing part of things.
Yes. So with the focus being on soft pastels, a couple different things that we look at is how they are handed over to either the framer or the customer that is going to then go to the framer, which can be, quite honestly, months or even years later. So we want to have a piece packaged up in a way where they will have something that they can fully enjoy because it's packaged safely for the framer to view who knows when.
Right.
Now we have here a great example. This doesn't have to be done with every piece, but it's a good example of something that's fairly simple. Cardboard box that simply has just a little bit of depth, so the piece of work inside here is never going to get compressed. So that's quite nice.
Would a deeper box be okay too?
Oh gosh,
I mean, you just have the piece in there, right? So we all have boxes hanging around.
Absolutely, and actually you don't even have to have a box.
Okay.
You can actually take a regular piece of board, mat board or foam core for example, and if the work itself is sitting on that board, then you can just take more strips of cardboard or foam core and cut little bits all the way around to create a little lift, and then another piece then sits on that and it is floating up. So
I love that idea. But for me, it's going to be a box.
Yeah. And the box is
that's perfect. I just thought I'll take to the framer to create that little. I love that. Thank you.
And then certainly the art itself, because the customer itself is likely going to take it out of the box and handle it, it's wonderful to have it covered. So here's a great example that Gail has a paper is called again?
Glassine.
Glassine paper. Glassine. So able to see through, so they know what image it is. So if they have a bit of a collection, they know which one that they're looking for. And also done in a manner where, in a lot of ways, the customer really probably isn't going to open it up. And that's kind of ideal. I actually hope that our customers are not showing off their art to all their family and friends. Because I have had a number of pieces where we've had smudges, fingerprints at the outside edge because they do mishandle it because they're not educated and they don't know how to handle soft pastel. So something like that's really nice to see because it allows it to be possibly stored for quite some time and then very easy for the framer to simply remove those tabs at the back and then show different combinations. And then from there are formats as some framers love to see.
Yeah, let's go. Are you going to tell me what the idea? It's Gail, you should bring it like this. Yes.
So picture framers love to see this where there is a board that's cut bigger than the paper itself. I'll just use this piece of paper here. So that was the pastel. And then from there, simply having a couple tabs. So assuming this is the face of the artwork.
This is the,
just a couple small tabs of, ideally if possible, Filmoplast P90 tape, kind of industry standard acid-free tape.
Where would you get that?
Oh gosh, this you'll get at almost every art supply shop.
Really, just an art supply shop?
Yeah.
I don't have to go to the framer to get it?
No, but certainly most picture framers are happy to sell it.
Okay.
And again, it's something that they certainly have available to order. But with a couple of tabs attached to the back of the work, and then those tabs then stuck down, like so, creating a simple little hinge. Then the paper, Glassine,
yeah.
can then be laid over that, and then it also could be hinged as well.
Or I guess it could be or hinged on the back.
Absolutely, even wrapped all the way around.
Yeah.
So this format, the reason why picture framers love seeing this format, it means that when it comes to their table, they can then actually take this board material, lay it on their table surface with no worries about soft pastel getting all over their workstation. And then it is much easier as well for them to talk to the customer about potential combinations because you now have a hard surface so they can kind of do things like this where they're looking at colors and not have the mats physically sit on the pastel art and then transfer pastel dust
Don't
on
like
the back
that,
of
huh?
all of our samples. So, now, it doesn't have to be done. The framers can do this the day the art comes into the gallery too. So,
But it's good to, also as an artist, it's so interesting because this is the way I prepare my work or my paper to work on.
oh, okay.
I have tape. I mean, it might not be this fancy tape, but now I think I might go and get that fancy tape because then it's just ready. Then I would transfer it onto a smaller board,
Yeah.
but it's already got the tape on the paper, and I
Yeah.
could just reuse it or retape it onto something like this. And this would you would just like have like a mat board, or what would you, or like what would
I mean,
you wouldn't use cardboard.
no, about
Because
the
it's
only material I
acidy.
wouldn't use is cardboard
Right.
because there is technically acid-free cardboard out there,
Yeah.
but I would recommend mat board or foam core. You know, they're widely available. Almost every picture framer has scraps and too much of both.
Good to know.
Yeah. So you'd be helping a picture framer by taking a lot of this material off their hands because we, as framers, do our best to use them up and we cut them to standard sizes, but at a certain point it's going into the landfill or being recycled because we just can't use it all up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Really good to know.
Yeah.
Okay.
So packaging, thinking about how a customer can transport it safely, how they can get to the framer so the framer can look at it. And then after that, then it's a matter of how it's framed.
I love this. That was really great. I love knowing about that, and I will really, really, really try to do better.
And again, it's something the framer can do the day the work shows up to the gallery as well. But yeah, it's a
great.
wonderful
Thank
little
you.
system.
Mm-hmm. So what's next?
So from there, once the work comes into the frame shop, or if the artist is going to frame it, the next thing is protection. Picture framing is essentially protection first, so the artwork can last a long time, and then it's aesthetics. So when we look at works on paper and soft pastels, glass is essentially a must. We can't get away with it unless an artist wants to shellac or resin coat their work in some manner.
Which then
which
it means it's not really pastel. I mean, I've tried that. I've tried and it doesn't look like pastel anymore.
Right.
So really, we just have to put it beneath glass.
So glass is utilized to ensure that the work can be enjoyed and it's not going to get smudged. From there, glass is a component that changes temperature very easily. So because it changes temperature very easily, we ideally do not like to see glass sitting right on art itself.
Could you say that again? Just repeat that,
Yeah.
please.
So the glass itself, because it changes temperature so easily, thinking of a hot summer day when you have a glass of iced tea on your table and the condensation beads up on
That's
the outside.
perfect for a summer day.
You know, glass on art is somewhat similar. When you think about art hanging on the wall for many years, temperature change in your house, it doesn't take long for moisture to possibly condensate on the inside of glass.
Not good.
So with all picture framing materials, because we're looking at paper dust cover, foam core, matting, there's breathable components within your frame. So no matter how much it's taped and sealed at the edges or anything like that, you're likely still going to get moisture that can transfer into the framing. So with glass sitting on art, possibly you're going to get moisture damage right against the art. So industry standard has been to utilize some form of a matting component. And mat boards are not terribly thick, but they're thick enough that they create an air pocket so that the glass is just floating off of the art itself. So that's been the standard format that works very well. Nothing wrong with that at all. The mat can be any width you want, it can be any color you want, it can be multiple mats if you want lots of spacing. But from there, you don't have to use matting. We can, and we have a great example over here. We can do something too where the artwork itself has a spacing strip, a plastic strip, that's underneath the glass and the frame lip. So with this, what we have is the protection still and a frame component that in this instance was enough designed that it was unnecessary to have that opening up of the matting component. So there are certainly alternatives. There's no doubt we have a lot of artists who will work on large pieces and they'll have the glass sitting right against it because they don't want their paper to buckle. So depending on the paper stock that the artist works on, or whether or not the paper stock was mounted first before they worked on it, will dictate whether or not spacing is going to be aesthetically a good look or not.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought, yeah, because the thinner the paper too, or thinner the paper, the more chance of it rippling.
Absolutely. So, because what happens with spacing is that this spacing strip sits at the outside edge of the paper, and it can actually cause the paper to buckle because you have tension just at the outside edge, and all that center has nowhere to go. So, as a custom picture framer, I have had a number of pieces over the years where we have mounted the art to an acid-free board. But anytime you mount finished artwork, there is a certain quantity of loss of the work because there is pressure applied to it. Even if it is applied with good paper that has very little tooth to it, it is still something that is going to cause a little bit of loss.
So ideally then, Mitchell, would you say that you would prefer if someone's is creating a big piece with thinnish paper, that they would pre-mount that paper
Absolutely.
Before, so that you don't have to, I didn't even know you could even do that after the fact. So having it mounted before working would be ideal, I guess.
Definitely, because a mounted piece of paper can still be matted and framed in traditional format, or it can be framed to just the artwork with spacing. So you still have options to go either way. Because again, even with a really large piece of paper and with matting, you still sometimes even get undulation, even with artwork hinged nicely and floating behind a mat. So sometimes with really big pieces, if that is something that artists like to work with, they should consider mounting their paper at the beginning anyway.
What's the size that you would say beyond this size you should definitely consider mounting? Like, would it be this size, or are you talking 18 by 24?
Yeah, and the paper stock makes the biggest difference, for sure.
That's true.
So a lot of times, if you were to take the paper that you like to work on, if you were to lay it down on the table before it's even worked on, and even just looked at across a strong angle, if it is seen firm and it has no motion or undulation to it, then you're going to be fairly safe. But even if you go to pick up your paper and you notice that it has an easy amount of play to it, well, that's a very good indicator that it's going to have a good amount of play within the frame that it's going to be living in for many years. So when we're looking at the framing components, as a picture framer, we have certain expectations that we like to let our customers and artists know that will occur with soft pastels. So a very classic format with soft pastels is to have a matte cut, but then to have the matte cut with a reverse bevel.
So so a traditional matte has that bevel that shows that little white strip, usually white, right?
Yes, most of the acid-free mattes have a white core.
And so that's that bevel that it's created, and that little white strip is created by that bevel, right? Yeah. And in this case, you're talking about the reverse, right? So it goes away, and you don't get that little white strip anymore.
Yeah, and with that loss of the white strip, so visually, if I sit onto a dark color, actually, that would be better. There we go. So there's a mat that clearly the white bevel can play a role in the aesthetics. So you might be losing out the effect of that aesthetics, but you gain the benefit of having a bevel that will not necessarily register and show up all the dust that particulates and falls off, because it will happen no matter what, no matter kind of how well you fix a piece. You know, it's a medium that will always shed a little. So the spacing is certainly a very common format as well, where this one, for example, this mat is sitting right against the art, but with a reverse bevel. So if anything does occur and there's particulate, the hope is it will fall behind that bevel. Now, as a picture framer, what we know is that the tension is out here where it's branded. So the tension is going to be strongest at the outside edge of the glass. Depending on the width of the mat and the overall size of the glass, we actually have an inner component here that is actually not held pinched tight up against the glass. So it's very easy for dust to actually fall even still in between the glass and the matting.
Even though the mat and the glass
Are tight.
are tight.
They're not, there isn't, in the back, there isn't constant tension in the center part that's pushing it all the time right up against the glass. So once the piece is vertical, it almost relaxes a little. So, and it's not a bad thing, but it's something that should be informed to both the artist and the customer, so that if in 5 years they look at something on the wall and they've been dusting and cleaning it, shaking it a little bit, they then understand why there's some particulate there, that you have an original soft pastel art that does, throughout its lifetime, still have some shedding or particulate that will come off of it. And that's not a negative, it's just something that if they're informed about it, then they're not disappointed. Now from there, what we have here is a classic matte cut with a bevel, but underneath this matte, they use, it looks likely, thickness of maybe another matte board. And that has just lifted that matte up off of the art itself. And because of that lift, it means that when this hangs, again, a larger trench, as they call it, will allow for dust to fall behind that mat, hopefully.
Yeah.
It's never a guarantee. A lot of picture frames, for example, this one, very easy to access and get in. So this one here literally could be popped out, safely dusted, reassembled, and put back on the wall. So there are different ways to approach it. And again, just be aware of expectations.
Right.
You know, realistic expectations for the art form. As a picture framer, one thing that happens a great deal is that most people are experienced with framing of flat two-dimensional posters. So they're very used to things being pristine, flat, clean. Nothing ever happens to it once it's in the frame. Whereas with a lot of original art, multimedia works and stuff like that, they're organic and stuff, and things change. You know, they're a bit messy, but that's the advantage of having an original.
That's right.
Yes.
Okay, so we've covered the matting, kind of framing, a bit about glass. What about plexiglass?
Yes, so glass. So when we look at framing that is going to be done where it is perhaps not being matted and it is straight to the image only,
Right. Yes.
most picture framers enjoy working with glass that is available in a whole wide variety.
Mm-hmm.
Non-gar glass, regular glass with a UV filter. We have glass now that has an optical coating baked into it to give you the clarity of, well, almost it's invisible. It's actually the same product that's been used for airplane pilots for years. And it's actually been used...
their windows?
Yeah, the windows. And it's been used in,
Clear.
funny enough, supermarket deli counters.
Oh,
So
so
you
you
can-
see all
yeah.
that?
I don't know why it took so long to come to the picture frame industry, but glass is the least expensive format and the easiest to clean. But all these products are available as a plexiglass product as well. So if you have a project where an artist has done something that's large, they don't want to mount it, they don't want to mat it, we could have plexiglass sit right against the work and there'll be a reduced risk of moisture damage. It's still there. It's not
You didn't hear that.
It's not as great as glass, but ideally, if you like working large and you have composed pieces that you find could look good with just frame only, the hope is that the artist will, they themselves have it mounted before the customer takes it, so they can perhaps address any loss from pressure, or mount it before they do the work. that would be the ideal.
Right?
And then from there, what type of glass to use? Again, advantage and disadvantage with every product available. As a picture framer, I still like to carry everything from the very basic regular glass, which, yes, it does have a very strong reflection, but it's got great clarity. It has very little color influence when it goes over the work. All glass, well, true view glass that I like to use has a reduced lead content, which reduces the green quality that it has.
The green of the
glass. So all glass, when it goes over work, has an ever so slight green kind of cast that isn't really ever talked about because it's going to happen no matter what. But we now have glass that has a wonderful conservation film that's applied to the glass. So it's like sunscreen for your art. A lot of pictures framers use this as a default. That's all that they offer because it is a very good product. But the disadvantage with conservation glass, and I'm not sure if this will show in the video or not, is that conservation film has a slight brown tint to it.
Oh.
So depending on your art and what you perhaps are matting, you have essentially
Oh, I can actually see it here.
a tint
It's
that
kind of pinky, a little bit pinky, warmer.
Yeah.
And this has got a little bit more greeny. This definitely has a. I would have thought it was like a reflection, but now that I see that they're two pieces of glass together, yeah, that's definitely got a.
So depending on your matting and the composition of your art, you may find that you want to use a particular product so that your whites stay as crisp and clean, perhaps, as you wanted them in the work.
So if you're doing a piece that's very high key, very light, lots of light colors, whites or pale yellows or pale blues that are very important to keep that, then that's something really to think about. As I guess if you're getting a little bit darker or more bold color, saturated color with that probably...
It doesn't affect them too much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you're right. So when you have, again, really strong, rich colors like this one, for example, is a piece that if we had it several strips, we probably wouldn't see much difference on this piece because of the wonderful reds and the blues and the golden yellows that are so strong. From there, we also have a new product now that has both either a conservation glass film component to it or the optical film that's called museum glass. We love it, but because of the brown tint, we do find that we use UltraView 70 a great deal.
UltraView 70.
Yeah, and the reason why I said UltraView 70, because they produce this for some reason in two other formats. It has a higher UV rating available that is not as quite as strong of a brown tint as a museum glass, but it is there. So the UltraView 70 gives you the best clarity, but it has the least color influence on your work. So when it goes over the work, they almost call it a water white effect. So very little change at all. So that's one of my personal favorites if we have a work where we just don't need to worry about conservation.
Okay, so that's it's more about the optics on that one,
Yes.
like how you see the work
Absolutely.
as opposed to how you're conserving it.
Yeah.
Right? Against sunlight or like UV
Well,
or what is the
so
protecting?
as a picture framer, the only light source that we are not worried about now are LED lights. They're the only light bulb that has no harmful UV output.
Wow.
So all halogen, incandescent, fluorescent lights, they cause a certain amount of damage to a small degree. And then ambient light is quite damaging too.
So you're talking about, okay, because we always talk about sunlight.
Yes.
Don't put your artwork in the sunlight.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a given. But you're also saying that, all these different bulbs, which I didn't know, except for LED, and reflected light, like sunlight's coming indirectly in, and the room is bright from the sunlight. That will affect.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Now, luckily though, most damage and most conservation products, funny enough, are available because of the lower end of the industry, posters and photographs.
Right.
Original art, oil paints, acrylics, the pigments in soft pastels, they're going to outlast us. So conservation is used for sometimes components like this unnecessarily.
Mm.
Now, there's a lot of picture framers that will use conservation no matter what. And it definitely has value, but I always like to look at whether or not we're compromising the work by using a conservation glass, because the amount of protection you're giving it is more for the next generation for a lot of these works.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think the pigments in these pastels are going to last a long time, especially if they're hung in a safe environment.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes back to talking to the customer about being aware that conservation glass is a product that slows fading down. It doesn't stop fading. So that's another thing too, is that the industry likes to talk about it having a 99% UV filter, which is wonderful, but that gives the illusion and the impression that you don't have to worry about your art anymore. But damage is still occurring. It just takes a little bit longer for it to occur.
And the conservation glass gives it that possibility of a color shift.
Absolutely.
Which is why
Yeah.
you're saying you might not necessarily need conservation glass.
Yeah.
If you want that clarity through the glass. It was the 70, the one with the
Yeah,
70.
so the UltraView 70 is my favorite product because of it having the least color shift to all your colors in your art and your matting, if matting is utilized.
And is that also the glass that doesn't have as much reflective,
Oh,
or
yes.
is that a different
Thank
glass?
So yeah, no, the UltraView 70 and the Museum are both the glasses that they say have a 1% reflection rate. So there will be times and you can walk into the room and you will get no reflection at all. It's a wonderful product. There will be times you'll get a sensor reflection that feels like regular glass reflection, but it's never as hard and sharp as reflection. So,
You're not going like this, trying to see the piece, right?
Yeah, so you'll always be able to view through the glare easier.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it comes back to understanding and having realistic expectations of the products. So glass samples in particular are very important. I think they should always be put over the work and what you're choosing so you can see and just be aware of what's going to occur. And then a lot of framers will try their best to have different examples on their wall as
A little
well.
bit like this.
And have,
right?
yes,
That's
you bet.
And do most framers have that type of, like those kind of sample of glass? If you were asking, do you have those to show, can we see the difference?
Yeah, yes and no. There's no doubt that conservation, which is wonderful, is being pushed very hard. So we have some framers that have cleaned up the selection for their customers and they only carry conservation only. And that's not a bad thing, but it's just important to know. For example, if you're hanging something on a wall that is a collection and you have 4 pictures that are regular glass,
right,
then you probably don't want to come home with museum glass and incorporate into that wall.
So then you're going to have to put different glass over all those other 4, right?
Yeah. And again, that's not to say that perhaps you want to redo the other ones, but you don't want to be forced to have to redo
right,
it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just talking on the conservation piece, we didn't talk about that with the mat, and because there's archival mats and archival backing.
Yes.
And budget-wise, we're like, how can we frame more inexpensively? But I'm always a believer in archival, acid-free.
You bet.
So just a little bit.
So luckily in the industry, conservation materials are now almost the default for all framers.
Okay, that's good.
What happened is that there was paper mats and acid-free mats.
Mm-hmm.
They look the same, but paper mats were designed for posters. So they faded and they discolored the work they were in contact with, and they were designed to last as long as posters. So 8 to 20 year shelf life was all they expected.
As the poster goes blue or...
Yeah, exactly. Now what's occurred is a couple different things. One is posters are better quality now, so they last longer, so you can't use these older, cheaper mats on them because they're outlasting the mats. And we just simply have more people wanting their colors to last longer, and we have more people buying acid-free mats, so they've come down in price. So they're not as expensive as they used to be, which is nice.
Yeah.
Don't hear that very often, but it does happen sometimes.
And what about the backing?
And backing, so I would again say that 99% of all picture framers just default use foam core as backing. Some will use coroplast as well, which is a great conservation material as well. But I don't think there's many framers out there that use cardboard anymore at all. The foam core is so reasonable in price. It's great to work with. It's versatile. So yeah, it's pretty much standard. But it's always good to ask.
Yeah,
always good to ask.
It's having the knowledge of what to ask. Because sometimes you don't know what the questions are. And so this is giving some knowledge about what you could ask about, right?
And certainly, and inquiring, if you're an artist or a customer taking a piece to a framer, how are they hinging the art into the framing? Do you want to make sure you don't have a framer who's going to, use spray adhesive or roll-on glue stick to get the art in there. So little questions can inform you and give you a good sense and understanding of the experience of your framer. And always encourage them.
So Mitchell, I have to ask you this question because in pastel world, there's that do I fix or don't I fix?
Yes.
To be fixed or not to be fixed. And there's this like, oh no, I can't fix it, it changes it, it's terrible, blah, blah, blah. And I think, well, there is that balance between the fixative, and there are fixatives that I've used that are pretty good in that they don't change the texture or the color or the darkness.
Yeah.
But I'm also assuming that as a framer, you would prefer to have something a little bit fixed. And the newer paper that we have, I know holds the pastel way better than some paper, but I'd love to get your view as a framer on the fixative question.
You bet. So as a picture framer, even if a piece is fixed, I approach it as if it wasn't. So I handle it as if it is completely fragile, because it is. Even a fixed piece is still fragile.
Yeah.
So depending on, and again, if an artist say they have fixed it, maybe that's an artist who likes to do a light dusting of a fixative, as opposed to several coats in different directions and putting a heavy layer on. So when a framer hears a piece is fixed, it's kind of nice to know, but I address it as if it's not been fixed. If I have a customer who is framing it and they're not familiar with it, we talk about how it's just natural for it to be, having dust and particulate falling off down the road, and just educate them, inform them that, bring it back, we'll give it a clean if it needs to be, and stuff like that, because there's no doubt that how you apply your fixative and what brand you purchase is going to be different anyway.
Yeah, that's great, because I never even thought about how have you fixed it?
Yeah.
And so it sounds to me that if I brought you a piece and I said it's not fixed, that you wouldn't go, okay, take it away and fix it. You would just deal with it.
Yep.
Because I know a lot of pastel artists are just it would be sacrilegious almost for them to fix their piece.
Yeah.
So it's good to know that there is that possibility.
I've never had an artist, and I'll have to take advantage of you being so close and local, to take a piece that is half covered, heavily fixate half, leave the other one not fixed, and then abuse it. Let's take a piece and see, because I can almost guarantee you we'll probably find that it still easily smudges. It still easily moves around. My understanding is that fixative is somewhat bonding and sealing the top surface.
Yes.
So you have all these other layers that are still allowing for shift and play. So I would say that as a framer, fixed or not, we just handle it with very careful gloves, and it doesn't affect all the combinations that we would still recommend.
I think we'll do that. We should do a video of that
I
and
think
see, let's
fun.
do it. I'll do the 3 knot sort of and heavily, and then we'll just that would be kind of fun to play with. Yeah.
Get our thumbs dirty.
All right. So, are there any other things that we? I do have another question.
Good.
Some artists, some pastel artists, like to work on watercolor paper or handmade paper, and it's that kind of paper that might have, what do you call it, like a decal edge or a rough edge, and they don't want to have that matte or the frame. They want to have, I guess it's called just sort of floating.
You bet.
How do you, is that a possibility?
It definitely is. So there's a couple of things to look at, depending again on how the artist likes to do their work on the surface and how much pressure from the backside might alter the work. So if I have a art piece that is done with nice deckled edges and we want that sitting on a backdrop where it's floating, we have to, on the backside, do something to hinge it to something. Usually it's foam core. Usually foam core is cut a bit smaller. We call it a pillar, where it rises the work up, and then you have a sensation of it literally floating. So with that, the framer is doing a couple different things. On the back of the paper itself, they either are taking a piece of mat board that is cut a bit smaller than the paper, and then from there, it can be acid-free tabbed all the way around. So you have tabs that go all the way around that piece of board so that you now have a firm surface on the back. Then this firm surface mat board can be then glued to your foam core pillar. So you now have a hard surface.
Oh, okay, so let me just get this straight. So what you're saying is that this isn't your final lifter. You've got
No.
your base, then you've got your foam core cut because it's quite thick.
Yeah.
Then you've got the mat board, which then can be glued to this.
Yeah.
And the mat board or whatever you're using is the support, the initial support
Yeah.
for the piece. So why are you using this rather than just the foam core? Since this is the pillar and this is the back. That's
Well, for me as a picture framer, I'm always aware that life happens. So if we have this onto a thin layer that's attached, it can be removed. So that's the one thing I'm usually looking for, is a format where these tabs can be removed and the art can then be matted traditionally, or it can be floated in a different manner. So I'm always trying to find a solution where the work itself is attached in a manner that's safe but also removable. So when it's onto this, you can then have your foam core pillar be whatever height you want and then attach it onto here. If we have your foam core pillar attached right to it, not a bad way to go, but you now don't have an option for changing that easily. Whereas if this is attached to a single layer mat board, you can decide to have it on 3 layers of foam core, 4 layers. You can kind of build it up. So as a framer, it just allows me for a bit more flexibility.
okay, great.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
So yeah, and then of course the other option is to fully mount the work to the piece to firm it up. But again, usually that's a last resort. Usually we try to avoid a full-on mounting format with any original, especially if the artist is not involved in the conversation. So that's another thing that I should bring up, is that as a framer, if a customer brings in an original piece to us, our approach traditionally is to not permanently alter this original. So I'll try all other different methods to try to float it, mat it using conservation, tapes and things like that. Usually if we're doing something aggressive, it's usually with the artist's consent.
That's nice. I love that you're kind of protecting the artist and the integrity of the work. That's
And again, and there's no doubt over the years we've had everything from artwork that's been glued onto silk fabric or metal sheeting. I mean, we've done some wonderful, amazing things with artists that are looking at creating a whole different way to display their work and using multimedia components. And it can definitely be done, but a lot of those formats, we have to be cautious how much we do it if we're dealing with the customer and the artist is no longer involved.
That's great.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of if there's any last things, or what about when I know that sometimes I'll cut my artwork and it may not be completely square because I don't, I measure, but I'm a little bit slap.
Yeah, so there's no doubt that your picture framer is going to be cutting a square opening in a mat board, or the frame is going to be square. So you have
square meaning not square, but
yeah,
I just want to be clear.
So you can have a framer who will hand line out mat boards so you can actually have angled openings, but traditionally expect that everything will be a square edge.
Yeah, like a right, or I guess a right angle, right?
Right
like
angle,
everything's and it's not going to adjust for the.
It just makes things go so much smoother if that is the expectation and understanding that happens within the picture framing industry. Yes, we have circle frames, we have oval frames, we have company that will literally make a frame in the shape of your hand if you want to send them a tracing. So there are some amazing things certainly available, but assume without incurring more cost,
right,
that the picture frame industry is basing everything off of straight edge for ease of cutting. All the machines are done that way. The frames and stuff are cut in that manner and joined in that manner. So there's lots that can be done outside of that. Just be aware that that's when you tend to incur more costs.
Right. And the fact that you're using this straight edge means that if my piece is a little wonky, some of it's just going to cover up some more of my piece.
Yes, that's a good point. And sometimes you don't know that until you go to see the framer. So some artists we recommend have some scrap mat boards cut with openings so they can actually drop it and lay it over their artwork to recognize, oh, I cut my paper not square, so they have to know that you're gonna, like a pizza slice, you're gonna have a certain quadrant that's gonna be losing more than you will at one end.
All right.
Yeah, because like I said, and then of course if we float it so you lose nothing, you now
Right,
have a
you've
piece
got-
of paper in a square frame that's not squared.
Oh my gosh. And
Which
on
we
it
do,
goes.
Sometimes you have to, you know. But
That's the handmade component.
yes,
Right. Any other things that we want to touch on before we wrap up?
no, but certainly happy to do another video because the one thing we didn't get into is talking about aesthetics. And that
Big
is,
topic.
could be several videos, and every picture framer has different theories on that as well. But yeah, that's something certainly we can touch on in another video.
That would be great.
Again, depending on feedback too.
Okay.
You know,
So I guess we're done for today.
wonderful.
Well, thank
That's
you
great.
so much for taking
Happy
the time.
to do it
Mitchell. It's been
anytime.
really great, and and please leave us comments and
Yeah.
questions, and if anything's not clear, let us know. Let us know. For sure.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You bet. Thank you.
We are in the beautiful Peninsula Gallery in. It's like, okay, so you're talking about.
Okay, I guess we're gonna pause.
Yeah, we're gonna pause.